Yeah. Well, they say that you only really should become a writer if you have to. And what is meant by that is, I think it's the same thing with theater. If you can't turn away from it and you must do it, it compels you, then do it. Because other than that, it's too hard of a life. Writing, as much as I love it, it can be really tedious. Right now, I'm in the midst of writing a new book, and I'm on the second draft of 14 chapters. I love it. I love the material, but you get to a point after about a year or so, writers do, where you just say, really, do I need to write this book? Because it becomes so overwhelming. But I somewhere when I was a young child, I think back and I don't remember so much about my father's, the wine cellar that we had, or my bicycle, or different things in the house. But I do remember his yellow legal pads. I always coveted them. I'd be 5 and 6 and 8 and 9 and 10 wanting to grab a yellow legal pad off his desk and just write stories.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the All Music Matters on That podcast. I'm your host Brian, and joining me today is a special guest, Stephanie Bennett, the wife of Earl Bennett. How you doing?
I'm well, Brian. How are you?
Not too bad. And it's actually been a while since we last talked. And to fill everybody in, Stephanie was actually a part of my other podcast with my friend Lenny, the Up for Grip show too. I'll leave the link down in the description below so people can see that. Just to kind of fill everybody in, we just kind of talked about different stuff. This time we're actually going to be talking about music, and I guess also about your writing, and I guess other sort of careers that you have, as well as being a teacher as well. So this ought to be interesting.
Yeah.
But I do have to ask, you guys were in Italy not too long ago. How was that?
Oh my, it was perfecto. It was so good. I mean, it was a strange feeling because it felt like I was home, but yet I've been brought up and born here. But I do have that Italian background, so maybe that's why.
I do have to say, Earl's trying to growing out the facial hair. Has he been doing that for a while? Looks like more like a goatee.
Well, I've given him a little makeover, I think his goatee and his mustache and his silver hair, yeah, I kind of like it.
That's pretty cool. And I guess what cities did you guys visit?
We visited Napoli. We visited a little city outside there where my family is from, my generational family is from. We visited Milan, which is very sophisticated and lovely. But my favorite city was Perugia, which is a very historic kind of center that, like, life goes on in there, but I think it's like 14th century or so. It's very old, and the people were warm, and it was wonderful. It was really wonderful.
I did ask what you think about the size of those pizzas, which I assume you had a first experience back in 2016.
Yes, for sure.
I was just saying, because Earl was like making those videos, like him just trying to eat those slices of pizza, but they don't cut it for you, so you had to improvise, and then it's like I would say is equivalent to like a medium-sized pizza here in the U.S. So
yeah.
So I felt bad, but at the same time, I know they were actually very good.
They were good. It was too much pizza for me. I never thought I'd say that in my life because I love pizza, but it was just pizza in every city. It was a little just too much for me.
It is a lot different, but I really wish they would cut it just to make it a lot easier, to be honest. The one thing I would say that was a little disappointing was whenever I would get a seafood pasta, whenever it had like the shrimp, they didn't like peel away like the major skin parts or the membrane or anything like that. So you had to do that on your own to get your hands all dirty. So it was one bit of a downside. But I mean, other than that,
yeah,
you pretty much name it. We've seen a good bit. We saw Leaning Tower of Pisa. We were in the Vatican. Even got to see the Sistine Chapel late at night. Walk through that real briefly. Venice, Sicily. We were in Perugia, and we actually saw where the Perugia chocolates were actually made.
Yes, Perugia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just just had something else come to mind. Oh yeah, in terms of like how the meals were set, because we were actually a part of our tour group too. You basically got 3 courses, so that means you could just go with an appetizer, meal, or a dessert, or you could go with 2 meals and then just jump into the dessert afterwards too.
Right.
So, needless to say, we were gluttons, to say the
Yes,
least.
I think they call it prima, seconde, and dolce. First, second, and then the third, course. Yep, tiramisu and all that. Well, I'm glad that we had time in Italy, and so did you. And thank you for having me on the show again. And you said you had wanted to talk about music and writing and creativity. Have you ever had anyone on before that talks about who is a writer or a creative?
I've had people on who said they've like written books, maybe talk about rudiments, stuff like that, and maybe things that they can apply to music. I don't know anything about like stuff that you have written too, because some of the articles you had touched on like loneliness, lyrical content, and then also like stuff about the Christian music scene too. And
Yeah, sure.
so we'll get into those in a little bit, but I guess let's start off with the beginning as we normally like to do, unless we could probably do like one of those sorts of skits where they jump around with, it's not in chronological order, if you know what I mean. So,
Right.
nah, we'll just keep it the same. So I'll start with the first one. Why did you want to become a writer, and then I guess later a teacher?
Yeah. Well, they say that you only really should become a writer if you have to. And what is meant by that is, I think it's the same thing with theater. If you can't turn away from it and you must do it, it compels you, then do it. Because other than that, it's too hard of a life. Writing, as much as I love it, it can be really tedious. Right now, I'm in the midst of writing a new book, and I'm on the second draft of 14 chapters. I love it. I love the material, but you get to a point after about a year or so, writers do, where you just say, really, do I need to write this book? Because it becomes so overwhelming. But I somewhere when I was a young child, I think back and I don't remember so much about my father's, the wine cellar that we had, or my bicycle, or different things in the house. But I do remember his yellow legal pads. I always coveted them. I'd be 5 and 6 and 8 and 9 and 10 wanting to grab a yellow legal pad off his desk and just write stories. No one told me to write stories, but I just loved to do it. So I honestly think that's when I started writing. And then I actually started publishing when I was in earnest about 21, and have been writing ever since. I started writing books about 20 years ago, and I've written 6 so far. I just love it. You have to love it. It's like, why does someone start on music? There's a lot of practice, rehearsal, rudiments to go through. But if it's in you, you just have to, right? So that's the answer to your first question about writing. Teaching, I never wanted to be a teacher. I'm happy being a writer. And at the time, before I became a professor, I was happy being, singing and writing songs and recording, never thinking that I was going to, or desiring to go teach college or high school or whatnot. But I was at the end of my doctoral program, and I was at a conference as a student. I heard someone speaking in front of me in a cafeteria line. And she was talking to the gentleman in front of her saying, I just wish we could find someone who really has this background. They really love communication. They want to teach it, and they're local. I'm not finding anyone. And he said something about West Palm. And I thought, that's kind of crazy. Oh, this is an international conference, and someone right in front of me is talking about my city and what they need. I thought maybe I know someone who does. So I started talking to them, and one thing led to the next. They asked me to come down and interview. I don't want to sound naive, but I almost didn't know what was happening because I had not jockeyed for this position or tried to become a professor. It was like some kind of divine spotlight was on me or something. And I took the job. That was about 20 years ago. And I found out that I loved it. And so that's why I'm there 20 years, because the passion I have for writing and for the creative process, music and everything else, being able to mentor young people who have that too, and the encouragement they need, the affirmation, the actual help they need. I love seeing them flourish. I just love the fact that I'm not just writing for me, but I'm helping to launch other people in the next generation to do something similar, you know?
Yeah, I have to admit. You know, it's always funny too whenever you find out something you were passionate about, which you never really thought of at first. Because that's how it was with me with podcasting, and also at least trying to also be a writer, and then trying like sort of other things, as well as like eventually taking up drums as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but at the same time, it also makes me angry too. It's like, why didn't I have this passion sooner? Like, I probably would have helped out with my life. Then maybe I would have picked like a different major in college or something like that. Because I actually did a business major at the university I had went to too. And did you say you actually went to college, or did you?
I went to college for 4 years in Pennsylvania at a private women's college. And then 12 years later, after I had my family, I went back and got my master's at Monmouth. And then I went further and did my PhD. So yes, I went to college.
I just wanted to make sure. Because
yeah.
I was funny with my dad, because he managed to get to a managerial position. He only got an associate's degree at some point. So I don't know. Back then it was a little bit different. Like these days, it seems like people are kind of turning away from like the college scene in general. But it was like, especially with me growing up, it was like, if you go to college, you'll be able to pursue any sort of job you want to after you get your bachelor's, that sort of thing. So I think that mentality is starting to wear and tear right now. Have you kind of noticed that too?
Well, yes, but I mean, I want to say that's nothing new, because higher ed and being in higher ed, and even long before me, hundreds of years before me, there's always been this kind of ebb and flow of the people thinking the importance of the 4-year college degree, and then kind of coming away with like, well, no, we need to get more skills based then come. And so there's always been like an up and down in terms of acceptance. However, one thing that has not wavered is the fact that if you do have your college education, it opens doors for you that you wouldn't be able to walk through, or even try to walk through, if you didn't have those credentials. So even though many colleges, many universities are getting much more in tune with, and then even what's the word I'm looking for, very much more inclined toward the specific jobs, like majors with specific dotted lines to a specific job. I mean, we've always had that. We've had nurses and doctors, and you go for your undergrad or your lawyers pre-law and pre-med. But now there's many more majors that are coming about this past 10, 15, 20 years that have supposedly a direct dotted line to getting that specific job. The problem with that is those jobs are all limited, and trends change and culture changes. So if you just for 4 years or 2 years educate yourself in to become proficient in a specific job, what happens 5 years later when like that job doesn't exist anymore? In our world of high tech, you have jobs that are like just falling off the edge of the world, left and right, and jobs that people will have in 10 years aren't even created yet, because of so many of the things that are changing in our culture, AI especially. So I always say, it sounds old-fashioned, but I just think it's honest, classic, and, safest. Honestly, get your BA. It doesn't matter what you major in. You get through those 4 years, you pour into your own future, and whatever future employer, wants to offer you in terms of a possible position, you actually be ready, because every single job needs training. Even if you have a business major, you need training in that particular business, So, yeah, I have a little bit of passion about this.
Do tell, that's for sure. I guess I also noticed it within your articles as well. So, did you say you were part of a magazine company at some point? Was that like a secondary job? Or was it still part of your...
Yeah, while the kids were being raised, I was writing for 3 or 4 magazines regularly. We call it freelance, right? But I had regular positions there. In CCM magazine, I was a contributing editor, writing cover stories, writing monthly columns. I had quite a few magazines I was doing that for. That's in the 80s and 90s, and newspapers as well. And that was wonderful because it gave me an opportunity to write, and especially write about the things that I loved and I I knew most about, as well as stay home with my kids and have, be able to stay the primary caretaker for my children, So yeah, I loved writing those articles. I mean, I think you already know I wrote for a long time for Modern Drummer magazine. I was never on staff there, though, and only had a few cover stories, but had a lot of the other smaller supportive secondary stories or columns and things like that. CCM magazine, Focus on the Family magazine, Gig magazine, quite a few.
Was like, yeah, you kept yourself busy with freelancing work too, so... But I guess
and freelancing, they're calling it gig work today. That's exactly what I did back then. It was, except we didn't call it gig work. Well, on the weekends, our music, when we had our wedding band, those were always gigs.
Was it gig work because you were like interviewing people after gigs, or is it kind of meant to like stand for something like GIG or something like that?
No, 2 different things. Earl and I had a band called Radiance. We mostly did weddings, some bar mitzvahs, mostly some corporate things, but mostly weddings. And that we had Saturday night gigs. We'd drop the kids off at their grandparents. They'd sleep over, and we'd just do a wedding into the middle of the night and be the entertainment. Those were our gigs. But when I say gig work, like freelance work, I'm meaning, I'm on the phone with the editor of CCM who is asking me if I can go to, Creation 90 and cover a story about DC Talk and this one, that one, and this one, that one. And then checking on my other article. And then on the phone with the next editor that afternoon, and like kind of managing these different gigs, these different small jobs, but they were consistent. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. The one I was actually trying to allude to earlier was about the articles you would write. Did they give you a topic to write about, or were some of them like, here's something I write about, what do you think? Was it along those lines?
Well, in the beginning, getting the work was, dear sir, I have an idea for an article for your magazine. Would you like to hire me to do this? I just kind of went out there and was bold. I'd find this was before the internet. So I would go to the masthead of newspapers and magazines and get the editor's name and the address, and I would write a query letter. So what we do now is we write query emails, right? But I would write a query letter. And once I get into a publication, most of the time it would develop into a relationship where they would then call me and say, hey, this is your area of music, or this is your area of expertise. Would you cover this story? Would you cover that? And so it happens both ways. And I think similar things happen today for people who want to get into publishing. You just have to, the best thing to do is to query publications that you love to read, because you know those publications. You're part of the audience. And in order to really write a good article, you have to be aware of the audience. You have to write in a way that you know that they can understand you. In other words, I wouldn't be writing an academic article for Modern Drummer, because that audience doesn't want to hear an academic article. They're interested, you know what I'm saying? So you have to really know your audience. So the best thing is to start by querying with ideas, magazines and publications that you like, that you read.
Fair enough. And I think I was in like the beginning when I was trying to maybe go into writing as well, but I was going to do like the fantasy and that sort of thing. I think I remember trying to reach out to like Tor Books, just trying to like figure something out, which is like one of the more top tier sort of publishing companies in the States. I do have to ask, and Just trying to remember how to phrase the question. I guess in terms of teaching, what all do you teach? And I guess what university are you currently at right now?
I teach about 8, maybe 10 different subjects, all in the field of communication and media studies. So one semester I'll be teaching something like nonverbal communication, public speaking, and digital culture. And another semester I'll be teaching something like interpersonal communication. I have a course I teach that's a seminar level course called Music as the Art of Communication. That's fun. I have another one called The Church in the Age of Entertainment. So we kind of look at how the church is affected by culture, both popular culture, music, movies, etc., and how that shapes people's experience in the church and what is communicated. So I teach all kinds of different, I have a class coming up called Speech Performance and the Oral Tradition. So I'll get into history and ontology and what it means to perform as you're speaking. In other words, taking care that you are, having proper eye contact and using proper gestures and all the kind of delivery methods that we need to do to become good speakers. Speaking of courses, I do also teach communication ethics. I teach at a small liberal arts Christian university right now. So,
Congratulations on 18 years. And
yeah.
I guess now we can kind of jump into COVID a little bit. I guess, how did COVID kind of impact the teaching? And then we can get into like how it affected you and Earl personally.
Oh, wow. COVID, huh? Well, that's a really loaded question because we could take an hour there, but I won't.
You can say, tell a short story, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think everybody in teaching and students were affected deeply by COVID. We went straight to online. My students, I already had hybrid portals where I could communicate with them after class or send them something in the evening. And they could get on the portal and download it or get the instructions and whatever. So I had that all set up already and had been doing that for a number of years. So when that weekend hit and everyone in the country decided to go, well, not everyone in the country went online with their students. Some people just shut down. We went forward and the students didn't miss a beat. They didn't miss their semester. It wasn't fun for anyone because we're all used to being with each other face to face, right? But that worked out fine. I'm just so thankful we're back to the classroom, the traditional classroom. So much goes on in the classroom that's positive. I mean, so much bonding and community building and mentoring and all that. And it's hard to have that happen online. But so that was in brief what happened with COVID with the students. Earl and I mean, we continue to thrive. Our children are grown, and so we didn't have little children running around and having to deal with their schooling and whatnot. I really felt for the younger parents in the country who had, it seemed like, so much more stress. I have to say, I don't like to say it too loud because, I just feel badly for everyone who had such a hard time. I liked that time. I thought it was quieter and more peaceful, kind of, brought me back to a simpler time. Like, it almost felt like the 70s or the 80s when I was in college, where my pace was a little bit, it was not frenetic or hectic anymore. It was much more well-paced. I got a lot of writing done. For a person who's a writer, if you're not writing, that feels terrible. So I could teach my classes, but also be home then and have a couple of hours a day to really just write and finish my book. The book that was published last year, Silence, Civility, and Sanity, that I started in the middle of COVID. So I'm still hoping that kind of cataclysmic change that we had in culture or shift or kind of, I'm hoping it was eye-opening and awakening enough for us to rethink some things in our culture, rethink what is success and what is important, because I see too many people who are stressed to the max. And the stats that I read from the journals about, anxiety and how much anxiety is up and how much depression is up and how much suicide and heart attacks. People are stressed out in our country. And I don't believe we were meant to live this way. I mean, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And it's not a civilized way to live. I think it contributes to the crime problem, the pace as it is, and the hecticness and the stress. It contributes to so many, like, marital problems, all kinds of problems. So COVID, there's nothing that any of us liked about COVID. It was very scary, and we lost a few people in my family through it as well. But in terms of like the deeper look at maybe what COVID has done and is doing, the awareness that anything could change in a minute. Hopefully that awareness, it will wake us up as a culture and say, okay, we need to be a little bit more sane here in how much work we take on, in what we think success is, et cetera, et cetera. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say I would kind of share your sentiment with the whole thing with working from home, that sort of thing too. I kind of say that was the best thing about it, especially when I was able to just get a couple more hours in, just get out of bed and just go right to my computer afterwards. So I would say that was at least one of the best things about it. But I would say I'm sorry for your losses too. I think Earl had mentioned it when I interviewed him a while back. And so...
Yeah. My very aunt, my father's sister, she was the only aunt I had left. I loved her so much. And she got sick in the middle of COVID and was one of the casualties, I guess, of people who weren't being taken care of in the hospital very well. Everyone I know had some kind of loss and is still dealing with some of the grief of it.
Yeah, I can understand. I guess, did you and Earl, did you guys have any brushes with COVID? I guess were you okay after you also came back from Italy too?
Yeah, no, I mean, I got COVID. I didn't get COVID till I thought COVID was over. I got COVID for the first time and the only time back in this past November. As a matter of fact, I think you and I had a conversation at the tail end of COVID. I had it for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we had a conversation, and I had just gotten over it. My voice was still a little scratchy. But yeah,
I think I had reached out because I think at that time I wanted to try to get an interview, do the interview then. But I think you had said you had got COVID, and I think I was in a bit tail end of my little episode because I was the same way. I thought COVID was at least over, or at least since we had our vaccination shots, we would at least not get it. But it can still happen. I mean, it affected me and my dad pretty good. So
yeah.
I just know I tried struggling on my drum set, just trying to sweat it out per se, but it couldn't work. So,
and some people had it really bad, really bad.
Yeah, I can understand. So, but it's good to see you and Earl made it through. So it's good to have you along for the journey.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
I do have to ask, kind of go back to writing. Do you self-publicate your works as well, or do you kind of use a publication company to help you out?
Publishers. I've not ever self-published. Actually, when I was much younger, I self-published a book, but never put it out there. I just kind of bound a few copies of some essays and poetry. That was 30 years ago, but never did anything with it. But since I've been, since I've been a professor, this has been now 18, 19, 20 years. It's always a publisher. Yeah.
I would say Amazon's starting to, it's called e-publishing, I think, because it still does it electronically per se, but you're able to self-publish it. So
yeah. Are you doing that? Is that what you're doing?
I would, just at least for the beginning, and then if I catch someone's eye, then great. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling with what I got, self-publishing wise.
Yeah.
Because really, at the moment, I got a couple jobs, and then you got podcasting on top of this too, so it's a lot to take in. Yeah.
You don't want to get too stressed out.
I'm afraid that happens a good bit at times, but at least in jobs that aren't too demanding, we should say. So, at some point, I would like to figure out how to get my work edited first, because I got at least 2 short stories I have right now I just
Yeah.
haven't got to it too, and I think it's my fault as well for procrastinating on them as well. So I'll have to stay tuned for that one, but I'll see if I can get them out soon.
It's easy to do. If you're a writer or want to be a writer, it's very easy to procrastinate because there's no, especially if you don't have a publisher, there's no one breathing down your neck, or there's no one with a deadline saying it's due in 2 weeks. And this is one of the reasons I really like to work with a publisher. Sorry about that. Is I can procrastinate as much as the next person, but I'm pretty good with deadlines. If you give me a deadline, I'll get it done, And people ask me, how do you get those books done in the midst of work and full time and grandchildren and everything else you're doing? I think you have to touch it every day.
You know,
can't the book and 3 weeks later or 3 months later say, we need to go back to that. Just need to look at it every day, even if you don't write. Pull up the document, edit it. If it's 2 lines, edit those 2 lines, make it even better. Just look at it every day and do a little bit of work on it every day. And then it'll start, like an engine, just getting all going.
I'm the same way. And it's funny you brought that up too. I feel like I need someone to tell me, because I think it's what I like to call a school effect too, because in terms of say just like a paper, for instance, it had to be due at this time. There was no exceptions whatsoever unless you were sick or whatever.
Right.
So I think we can blame school for that. So I think it's got into your mentality. If I have say a teacher who tells me you need to have this due by this specific time,
right,
then the brain kicks in, and then I think that's what gets over your procrastination too. So I feel the same way. I think I would write a little bit more as well. I got the ideas and everything. I just can't put it down on paper until I feel like some sort of pressure or something too. So,
well, you have to just pull up a document and put a working title there, and that way you know where that document is. You just keep pulling up that document, even if it's one word.
Yeah, that's true. And sorry earlier, I was trying to at least make that point. I almost interrupted you there too, so we're at least good. But in terms of your other works, I guess you also did interviews. I guess how'd that whole thing happen? How did it start?
Interviews. There is an art to interviewing someone. You really need to be curious about why they do what they do. You need to be a very good listener. And you need to, as much as possible, not bring yourself into it in terms of the content. A little bit, yes. And so that's part of what I teach too at the university, the interviewing. A good journalist knows how to interview. But there's getting the articles, the big interviews, is really no different than pitching other articles to magazines. You have either an opportunity to meet with someone and interview them, and then you pitch it. You say, I wrote this article, and I think it'd be great for your publication. Or you have an idea to do it. You try to find someone who will let you do it. And if you get a magazine or a publication that says, yes, we'd love to have an article about her or about him or about this subject with that, that interview, then you have to go about seeing if you can connect with the person. And if it's a big name person, you're looking at their publicist, or their A&R person, or the person who represents them, And so I did that sometimes both ways. So I would have an idea to do an article, say on Amy Grant and her team, her music team, and how they get along, or what they do on the road, and pitched it to a magazine. And they said, great, yeah, we'd love that. So I knew I had the article. This was a very early article. I just had to get to her. So then it's dealing with her company, her music label, and talking to the marketing people and the A&R people and say, can you, she's coming to Pennsylvania, or she's coming to Tennessee, or wherever I was going to be. Can I have a backstage pass? Can I have an hour with her? And so there's a lot of negotiating. People don't realize how much goes on when you're, when they see an article in a newspaper or a magazine, especially, and what it takes to get there. A lot of little bits of management and negotiation and very strong communication skills, and then you write it. Then you interview, and then you write it.